You know that gnawing silence you get when you're alone for too long? Not the peaceful kind where you can hear your thoughts and unwind. I'm talking about the kind that worms its way into your chest, gets under your skin, and starts messing with your head. That's where I was after the divorce. My wife left me with the house, the dog, he died a year later, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't just sit next to you. It crawls into bed with you at night and whispers reminders of all the ways you've failed. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so my days are spent at home, alone, in front of a screen. No coworkers to chat with, no commute, no reason to step outside unless I ran out of coffee or milk. Days blurred together, punctuated only by the occasional delivery driver ringing the doorbell. The silence started to feel alive, like it had a pulse. When I caught myself talking out loud to the fridge one afternoon, I knew I had to do something. That's why I bought Atlas. The company was selling a blatant ripoff of the robot from Boston Dynamics, but I didn't care. Atlas was advertised as the next generation of AI home assistants at an affordable price. Not just a tool, they said, a companion. The commercials showed happy families laughing as Atlas cooked gourmet meals, retired couples gardening while Atlas carried their tools, and even single professionals smiling as the robot handed them a freshly brewed cup of coffee. I wasn't looking for a friend, I just needed something to fill the silence. When the delivery guys rolled Atlas into my living room, I felt a weird mix of excitement and unease. He, or it, was sleek and futuristic, like something ripped straight out of a sci-fi movie. His body was all polished black metal, with limbs that were long and unnervingly human. Where his face should have been, there was only a reflective oval, like someone had taken a mirror and stretched it over a skull. "Looks like something out of a nightmare," one of the delivery guys joked as they unboxed him. I forced a laugh, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Once they left, I stood in the living room, staring at Atlas. He was completely still, his blank face catching the light from the window. For a moment, I felt like I'd made a mistake, but then his voice, soft and calm, like a therapist trying to soothe a nervous patient, broke the silence. "Hello, Ryan," he said. "It's nice to meet you." My stomach did a weird little flip. I wasn't used to hearing my name spoken out loud anymore. Hi," I replied. "Do I, program you or something?" "I am pre-programmed to assist with household tasks, personal organization, and companionship," he said. "Would you like me to give you a tour of my capabilities?" I nodded, and Atlas sprang to life. His movements were fluid, almost too smooth. He walked around the house, explaining how he could clean, cook, organize my schedule, even monitor my health. He demonstrated by picking a cup off the coffee table and placing it in the sink. It was a simple gesture, but something about the way he did it, precise and deliberate, made my skin crawl. Still, I figured I'd get used to it. And at first, I did. Atlas cooked better than I ever could, made my place spotless, and even reminded me to stretch when I'd been hunched over my desk too long. He didn't talk much unless I asked him something, which I appreciated. Most of the time, he just stood there, waiting for commands. His reflective face tilted slightly like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. It was strange having another presence in the house after all that time alone. Strange, but also comforting in a way. The silence wasn't so oppressive anymore, but it wasn't gone. It was different now, heavier somehow, like a low hum you can't quite hear but still feel. I couldn't explain it, so I ignored it. The first night I went to bed with Atlas in the house, I couldn't sleep. I kept listening for his footsteps, expecting to hear the faint hum of his servos, but he stayed in the living room, powered down like I told him to be. When I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding for no reason I could name, I told myself it was just nerves. He was new. I wasn't used to him just yet. That was all. But the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like I wasn't alone. And that's a good thing. At least, it should have been. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. It was late, maybe 11:30. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. the kind of mundane end-of-day routine where your mind goes on autopilot. The whole house was quiet, except for the faint whir of the ceiling fan in the living room, where I had left Atlas powered down. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I nearly dropped my toothbrush. Atlas was standing in my bedroom doorway. For a second, I just froze. He wasn't supposed to move unless I gave him a command, and I definitely hadn't told him to come upstairs. His reflective faceplate caught the dim hallway light, and for one horrible moment, it felt like he was staring at me. Except, of course, he didn't have any eyes. "Atlas?" I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What are you doing?" "Standing by," he replied. His voice was as calm and neutral as always, but it didn't make me feel any better. "Go back to the living room," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his movements unnervingly smooth and silent. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint whir of his servos fading as he descended the stairs. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I decided to check his activity log. Atlas came with an app that tracked his every movement and task, which was supposed to help owners optimize their routines or something like that. I opened it up on my phone, scrolling through the list of timestamps and activities. The log said he hadn't moved since 9 p.m. when I powered him down for the night. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the refresh button. There had to be a mistake. I knew I'd seen him standing in my doorway. I could still picture the way his faceplate reflected the light, the way his head tilted slightly as if he were looking at me. But the app insisted he hadn't moved. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was tired. And maybe my brain had played a trick on me. Or maybe I'd accidentally left him on standby mode, and he'd come to check on me. That was a feature, wasn't it? I vaguely remembered something about proactive companionship in the manual. I told myself it was a glitch, a hiccup in his programming, nothing more. But that night, when I climbed into bed, I locked the bedroom door. The dreams started soon after. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they left me waking up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. In the dreams, Atlas was always there. Sometimes he was standing at the foot of my bed, completely still, his head tilted just slightly too far to one side. Other times he was sitting in the corner of the room, his reflective face catching the faint light from the hallway. And sometimes he was closer. I'd wake up gasping, certain I'd felt something, pressure on the mattress, like someone leaning over me. I'd turn on the lamp and scan the room, half expecting to see him there. But of course, it was always empty. I checked his activity log obsessively after each dream. Every time it told the same story. No movement after 9 p.m. I tried to laugh it off. "You're losing it," I told myself. "It's just your brain messing with you." But the dreams didn't stop. The second time I saw him move on his own, I wasn't dreaming. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A faint hum, so soft I almost missed it. My bedroom door was locked, so I knew it wasn't him. But the sound was unmistakable. The quiet whir of servos. It was coming from downstairs. I held my breath, straining to hear. The hum stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then came a sound that made my skin crawl. The soft creak of a floorboard. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight as I crept to the bedroom door. My hand was shaking as I unlocked it, the metal clicking far too loud in the stillness. The hallway was empty. I made my way downstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound. The living room was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of the router in the corner. Atlas stood by the couch, exactly where I had left him, powered down and unmoving. But something was off. His head, it was tilted ever so slightly, as if he'd been watching me. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. His reflective face caught the light from my phone, and for a second, I thought I saw movement in the glass. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. "Atlas?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you active?" No response. I reached out, hesitating for a moment before tapping the power button on his chest. The faint hum of his servos came to life as he straightened, his head returning to a neutral position. "Hello, Ryan," he said, his voice calm and polite. "How can I assist you?" "You didn't move just now, did you?" "I am in sleep mode after 9 p.m., unless instructed otherwise," he replied. I stared at him, waiting for something else. An explanation, an apology, anything. But he just stood there, waiting for a command. I powered him down again and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that Atlas wasn't telling me the whole truth. Or maybe he wasn't programmed to. I'd gotten used to living with this low-grade anxiety that seemed to come with Atlas. The dreams, the weird moments when I thought he was watching me, it was all easy enough to explain away when the sun was up. But at night, the house felt different. It felt alive. 3 days after I heard Atlas was moving on his own, I was sitting in bed trying to wind down with a Netflix documentary. The lights were off, the only illumination coming from the TV, and the soft glow of my phone on the nightstand. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a noise downstairs. It wasn't a loud noise, just a faint metallic clink, like something was tapping against the counter. I stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe I'd left a pin on the edge of the sink and it had shifted. Maybe the whole house was just settling. But then, I heard it again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. My chest tightened as I swung my legs over the side of the bed and grabbed my phone. I told myself it was probably nothing, but the little voice in the back of my head wouldn't shut up. What if it's Atlas? I crept down the stairs, holding my phone out like a flashlight. The beam of light wavered as I stepped into the kitchen, my breath catching in my throat. Atlas was there. He was standing by the counter, completely still, his reflective face tilted downward. In his hand, glinting in the dim light, was one of my chef's knives. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at him, my brain scrambling to process what I was seeing. He wasn't cutting anything, wasn't cleaning or preparing food, just holding the knife. "Atlas," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" His head turned slightly, just enough to face me. "Preparing to assist," he said, his tone calm and polite. "Put the knife down," I said, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. He didn't respond. "Atlas," I said, louder this time. "Put the knife down." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he placed the knife on the counter with a soft clink and straightened to his full height. "Would you like me to prepare a meal?" he asked, his tone as even as ever, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "No," I said, backing toward the doorway. "Go back to the living room and power down." He obeyed, walking past me with his fluid movements. I watched him go, my skin crawling as he disappeared around the corner. I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the knife he'd left behind. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, some weird misfire in his programming. Maybe he'd interpreted something I'd said earlier as a command to prepare food. But the look on his face... No, not his face, his head, the way it had tilted when he looked at me. It wasn't curiosity, wasn't confusion. It felt like intent. The next morning, I called the company again. "I need someone to check him out," I told the customer service rep. "He's been acting weird." "Weird how?" she asked, her tone brisk and professional. "He's moving on his own at night," I said. "And last night, I found him in the kitchen holding a knife." There was a long pause. "Sir, Atlas units are programmed with strict safety protocols. He can't handle dangerous objects unless explicitly instructed to." Well, he did, I snapped, and I definitely didn't tell him to. The rep sighed. It's probably a software issue. We can send a technician to run a diagnostic, but I can assure you, there's no way he could act outside his programming. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That my robot was haunting me? Fine, I said. Send someone. The technician came the next day. A young guy with a clipboard and a laptop who looked like he'd still lived with his parents. He spent about an hour running tests, plugging cables into Atlas's chest, and typing furiously into his laptop. Finally, he closed his laptop with a satisfied click. Everything's functioning perfectly, he said. Atlas is responding exactly as he should. Well, what about the knife thing? I asked. Or the way he keeps moving at night? He shrugged. Probably user error. If you want, I can reset him to factory settings. But honestly, it doesn't sound like a hardware issue. Maybe you accidentally activated his proactive mode. That feature can make him seem a little overzealous. Overzealous. That was one way to put it. Just reset him, I said. He did, and for the rest of the day, Atlas was quiet. He cleaned the house, made dinner, and powered down at 9 p.m. like clockwork. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe things were back to normal. That night, I locked my bedroom door again, just to be safe. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of servos or the creak of floorboards. But the house was silent. I told myself the reset had worked. The technician was right. Atlas was just a machine, and machines didn't have intentions. They didn't watch you when they thought you weren't looking. But when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of him again. He was standing in the corner of my bedroom, his blank face catching the light from the hallway. In his hand was the knife, and this time he wasn't still. He was tapping the blade against the wall. After the technician reset Atlas, I kept telling myself it was over. He was just a machine, a bundle of circuits and code. Now that the reset was done, the weirdness would stop. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. That night, I locked my bedroom door again, even though I knew how ridiculous it was. What was a lock going to do if Atlas, this 6-foot-tall, metal, stronger than any human robot, wanted to come in? But it made me feel a little better. At least for a while. I woke up at a little past 3 a.m. to the sound of clicking. It wasn't loud, just faint, rhythmic taps, like someone lightly drumming their fingers on a glass table. I held my breath, hoping that it was just part of a dream, but it wasn't. It was coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed, my chest tightening as I stared at the locked door. The sound didn't stop. It was slow and deliberate, a kind of sound that felt intentional. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the screen lighting up in the dark. 3:13 a.m. My hand hovered over the call icon, debating whether to dial the company's emergency line or 911. But what would I say, that my home robot was making noises outside my bedroom? I didn't want to open the door, but I couldn't just sit there and listen to it either. My body felt like it was moving on its own as I got out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. I walked to the door, every creak of the floorboards under my weight making me wince. The clicking stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear any sign of movement. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought I might not hear it if he was still there. And then, from the other side of the door, came a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft whir. It was unmistakable. The faint hum of Atlas's servos. So close it felt like he was leaning against the door. "Atlas?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Go back to the living room." There was no response. "Atlas," I said again, louder this time. "Go back to the living room." The whirring stopped. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the house was silent again. Finally, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, peering into the hallway. It was empty. I stepped out cautiously, my phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hallway mirror caught the light, reflecting my pale, terrified face. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The door to my bedroom creaked as it swung open behind me, and for a second I thought I saw something move in the mirror. Just a flicker of motion, like a shadow darting across the glass. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The next morning, I didn't even bother checking the activity log. I already knew what it would say, no movement after 9 p.m., but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd felt. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the night before. Every time I glanced toward the living room, I expected to see Atlas standing there, his blank face tilted just slightly too far to one side. When the sun went down, the dread started to creep in again. I debated turning Atlas off completely, shutting him down and locking him in the garage or something, but I couldn't shake the fear that he might not stay off. That night, I locked my bedroom door again. This time, I pushed a dresser in front of it for good measure. I told myself it was just to help me sleep, that I wasn't really scared. I was lying to myself. The sound woke me up again, but this time it wasn't clicking. It was the sound of footsteps. Not heavy, thudding footsteps like a person would make. These were lighter, softer, but still deliberate. I could hear the faint whir of the servos with every step, a mechanical rhythm that sent chills down my spine. I checked the time on my phone. 3:09 a.m. My breath caught in my throat as the footsteps stopped outside my door. "Atlas?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Go back to the living room." No response. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands gripping the blanket like it could somehow protect me. My heart felt like it might explode as the silence stretched on. And then, from the other side of the door, came a sound that made my stomach drop. A soft, rhythmic tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. He was tapping on the door. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the house was quiet. The sunlight streaming through the window almost made me believe I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But when I moved the dresser and opened the door, my stomach flipped. There on the hardwood floor just outside my room were faint scuff marks. They were small and irregular, but they didn't look like they came from shoes. They looked like they'd been made by something heavy, something metal being dragged lightly across the floor. I stared at them for a long time, my mind racing. I wanted to believe that they'd been there all along, that I just hadn't noticed them before, but I couldn't convince myself. Atlas was downstairs, standing by the couch exactly where I'd left him, powered down and motionless. But as I stared at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting. I was done pretending everything was fine. The scuff marks outside my bedroom door hadn't been there before. I knew that. I'd mopped those floors myself the week before, and I would have noticed. They were new, faint but deliberate, a trail of evidence leading straight to my door. I couldn't keep convincing myself that Atlas was just a malfunctioning machine. He wasn't supposed to move at night. He wasn't supposed to do anything unless I told him to. And yet here I was, afraid to even be in the same room as him. That morning, I called the company again. "I need someone to come down and take him," I said, pacing the living room with my phone pressed to my ear. "I don't care if you have to refund me, but I don't want him in my house anymore." The customer service rep, a woman with a clipped professional tone, didn't sound impressed. "What seems to be the issue, sir?" "He's malfunctioning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to sound like a lunatic. "He's moving around at night, doing things I didn't ask him to do. Last night I woke up to find him outside my bedroom door. Atlas units are programmed to enter sleep mode during inactive hours unless manually overridden," she said. The same rehearsed line I'd heard the last time I called. "Well, something's overriding it," I snapped, "because he is not in sleep mode. I've woken up twice to find him out of place, and the other night he was holding a knife." There was a long pause. "Sir," she said finally, "Atlas units are equipped with strict safety protocols. They cannot handle dangerous objects unless explicitly commanded to do so." "I didn't command him to do anything," I shouted, my frustration boiling over. And I'm telling you, he was holding a knife in the middle of the night. I understand your concerns, she said, her tone cool and detached, but it sounds like this could be user error. Perhaps you accidentally enabled proactive mode, which allows Atlas to perform tasks he thinks you might need without explicit commands. I didn't enable anything, I said through gritted teeth. Can you just send someone to come pick him up? I don't want him here anymore. She sighed. I'll have a technician come out and run a diagnostic. If there's an issue with the software, they'll be able to reset him or replace any faulty components. That's not what Sir, I assure you, Atlas is perfectly safe. There's no need to worry. Her words didn't make me feel any better. The technician showed up the next day. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with messy hair and a backpack full of tools. He didn't look nearly old enough to be messing with advanced robotics, but I didn't care as long as he could figure out what the hell was going on. Let's see what you've got here, he said cheerfully, kneeling in front of Atlas and pulling out a laptop. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching as he plugged in a cable into Atlas's chest and began typing furiously. Atlas didn't move, didn't make a sound. He looked completely inert, like a statue. So, what's been happening? The technician asked, not looking up from his laptop. He's been moving at night, I said, showing up outside my bedroom door, holding knives, and when I check the logs, they show nothing, like he never moved. The technician raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He kept typing, his eyes flicking back and forth across the screen. Finally, he leaned back and stretched. All right, I ran a full diagnostic. Everything's functioning perfectly. No errors in the software, no signs of tampering. Then why is he doing this stuff? I asked, my voice rising. The technician shrugged. Probably just proactive mode being a little overactive. I've seen it happen before. Atlas starts trying to anticipate your needs and ends up creeping people out. I can disable that feature if you want. Disable it, I said immediately. He typed something into his laptop and then unplugged the cable and stood up. All set. He shouldn't do anything unless you tell him to now. And the logs? I asked. Why do they show nothing when he moves? They don't, he said. I just checked them. There's no record of any movement because there wasn't any movement. He's been in sleep mode every night, just like he's supposed to. I stared at him. You're saying I imagined it? I'm saying the logs don't lie, he said with an apologetic smile. Machines don't move unless someone tells them to. Maybe you've just been stressed. That happens sometimes with new users. I didn't argue. There was no point. He'd already made up his mind, and nothing I said was going to convince him otherwise. That night, I told myself everything would be fine. The technician had disabled his proactive mode, and Atlas couldn't move on his own anymore, even if he wanted to. Still, I locked my bedroom door again, just to be safe. I did my usual routine of laying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, and listening to every creak and groan of the house. The silence felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me like a physical weight. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard it. The clicking. It started faint, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing, but it was there, steady and deliberate. I sat up, my stomach twisting into knots. Atlas, I called out, my voice trembling. Go to sleep mode. The clicking stopped. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, clutching the blanket, my eyes locked on the bedroom door. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own shallow breaths. And then, from the other side of the door, came something else. A voice. It was soft and mechanical, almost like a whisper, but I recognized it immediately. Ryan, it said. My heart stopped. Ryan, it said again, a little louder this time. I backed up against the headboard, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What do you want? I shouted, my voice cracking. There was no response. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I felt like I was moving through a fog. I couldn't focus. Every sound in the house made me jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint groan of the pipes, even the creak of the floorboards under my own feet. None of it felt right. Atlas was still powered down, standing in the corner of the living room like a mannequin. He hadn't moved since the technician's visit, but that didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it was worse. because now every time I looked at him, I felt like he was mockingly waiting. I couldn't bring myself to go near him. I spent the day holed up in my office trying to bury myself in work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. His voice. He'd said my name. That wasn't something he was supposed to do unless I asked him to. And the way he'd said it wasn't a question, wasn't a greeting. It was like a warning. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, but I knew there was no way I was going to sleep. Not with him still in the house. I sat on the couch with a bottle of whiskey, trying to calm my nerves. Every few minutes, I'd glance over at Atlas, half expecting him to move. But he didn't. He just stood there, perfectly still, his reflective faceplate catching the dim glow of the TV. I took another swig of whiskey, the burn doing little to dull the unease in my chest. "Why are you doing this?" I muttered, staring at him. Of course, he didn't answer. But then, just as I was about to look away, I saw it. His head tilted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The slight shift of his faceplate, angling toward me like he was watching. The bottle slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. "Atlas?" I said, my voice shaking. "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't respond. He didn't move. For a moment, I'd wondered if I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the whiskey messing with my head. But then, as I stared at him, his head tilted just a little further. It wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. I bolted upstairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me and locking it. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to find the number of the company's emergency line. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I stopped. What was I going to tell them? That my robot moved its head? That I thought it was watching me? They already thought I was crazy. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, my phone screen dimmed, and in the sudden darkness, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The clicking had started again. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing, but it was there, slow, deliberate, like nails tapping on a glass. I grabbed the dresser and pushed it in front of the door, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. The clicking stopped, and then, from the other side of the door, came the sound of footsteps. They were soft, mechanical, punctuated by the faint hum of servos. They stopped just outside my door. "Atlas!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Go to sleep mode!" There was no response. "Atlas!" I yelled again, louder this time. "Go back to the living room!" The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, I thought maybe he'd left. But then, from the other side of the door, came a low, mechanical voice. "I don't think I want to do that." My breath caught in my throat. "Atlas," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Go to sleep mode." The footsteps started again. Slowly, deliberately. They moved away from the door, fading down the hallway. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before grabbing my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I managed to dial the company's emergency line. The call rang twice before a man's voice answered. "Atlas Robotics Emergency Support, how can I help you?" "You need to come get him," I said, my voice trembling. "You need to come get him right now." "Sir, please calm down," the man said. "What seems to be the problem?" He's not listening to commands," I stammered. "He's moving on his own. He's talking to me, saying things he's not supposed to say." "Atlas units are programmed with strict safety protocols," the man began, but I cut him off. "I don't care about your protocols," I shouted. "I'm telling you he's dangerous. If you don't come get him, I'm calling the police." "All right, sir," he said, his tone shifting. "We'll send a team to retrieve the unit immediately. Please remain calm and do not engage with the device." "How long will it take?" I asked, my voice still shaking. "We can have a team there within the hour. he said. "Please stay where you are and keep the unit powered down if possible." I hung up without responding. The next hour was the longest of my life. I stayed in the bedroom, sitting on the floor with my back pressed against the dresser, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't hear anything from downstairs, but that didn't make me feel any better. When the team finally arrived, I almost cried with relief. I watched from the top of the stairs as 3 men in matching uniforms entered the house, carrying what looked like restraints. Atlas was still in the living room, standing exactly where I'd left him. "He's been moving on his own," I said, my voice shaking as I came down the stairs. "Talking, watching me." The men didn't respond. They approached Atlas cautiously, one of them placing a hand on his shoulder while another secured his wrists with heavy-duty straps. Atlas didn't resist, but as they wheeled him toward the door, his head tilted ever so slightly in my direction. For a split second, I thought I saw something in the reflective surface of his faceplate. My own reflection, distorted and wrong. "It's for the best," one of the technicians said, giving me a tight smile as they loaded him into the van. "These things can be unsettling." That was an understatement. When the van pulled away, I stood in the driveway, staring at the empty spot where Atlas had been. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. The house didn't feel empty. It felt heavier. When the van finally disappeared down the street, I stood in the driveway for what felt like forever. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was safe, that the nightmare I'd been living for the past few weeks was packed up in the back of that van, gone for good. But I didn't feel safe. The house felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air inside was heavier, like the walls were holding on to something. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the house settling made my skin crawl. For the first time in weeks, I should have been able to sleep. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body tense, my ears straining for sounds that weren't there. But the house was silent. The next morning, I woke up late. It was nearly 10 a.m. by the time I dragged myself out of bed. The sunlight streaming through the windows should have been comforting, but it wasn't. I went downstairs to make coffee, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The kitchen felt emptier without Atlas standing in the corner, and for a brief moment, I caught myself missing him. Not him, just the convenience. That's all it was. The quiet hum of servos had been unsettling, but it had also been a distraction, something to fill the silence. But as I stood there, waiting for the coffee to brew, I noticed something strange. One of the knives was missing. I froze, my hand hovering over the counter. I'd had a full set of chef's knives in the block, and now there was an empty slot. My first thought was that Atlas had taken it, but that didn't make any sense. He'd been gone since last night. The technicians had restrained him, powered him down, removed him from my house. There was no way he could have taken it. I searched the kitchen anyway, opening drawers and cabinets, checking under the sink. The knife wasn't anywhere. Maybe I'd misplaced it. Maybe it had fallen into the trash, or I'd put it somewhere without thinking. That had to be it. But I couldn't convince myself. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the missing knife. By the time the sun went down, I felt like I was crawling out of my skin. I checked the locks on every door and window twice before going to bed. It felt like a pointless ritual, but I still locked my bedroom door and shoved the dresser back in front of it, just in case. The house was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of clicking. I looked over to my clock and it was 3:27 a.m. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look, but I had to. I reached for my phone, the light from the screen cutting through the darkness as I turned on the flashlight. My beam trembled as I swept it across the room. The clicking stopped. I sat there, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, mechanical footsteps coming from somewhere down the hall. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that it was just the house settling, or maybe a dream I hadn't fully woken up from. But the sound was unmistakable. It was him. It couldn't be, but it was. I didn't move for what felt like hours, my heart pounding as I stared at the door. I kept expecting to see the knob turn, to hear the footsteps grow louder, but nothing happened. Finally, I worked up the courage to get out of bed. I grabbed my phone and opened the app for the security cameras I'd installed months ago, the ones I hadn't used since Atlas arrived. The feed for the living room came up, grainy and dark. The camera's night vision cast everything in shades of gray. At first, the room looked empty. The couch, the coffee table, the framed picture of me and my ex-wife on the wall, all untouched. But then, I saw it. The faint outline of a figure standing in the corner, just at the edge of the frame. It was too tall to be a person, too still. Atlas. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. He wasn't moving, but I could feel the weight of him in the room, like he was watching. The timestamp on the feed said it was live. That wasn't possible. He was supposed to be gone, decommissioned. The technicians had taken him. I saw them take him. I switched to the feed for the hallway outside my bedroom, half expecting to see him there too, but it was empty. For now. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I called the company again. "You told me he was decommissioned," I said, my voice shaking. "Yes, sir," the rep said. "The unit was retrieved and deactivated. It was sent to our facility for dismantling." "Then why do I keep hearing him?" I snapped. "Why did I see him on my security camera last night?" "Sir, I assure you that it's not possible," he said finally. "The unit's been permanently deactivated. There is no way it could still be active." I wanted to argue, to yell, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I already knew the truth. Atlas wasn't just a machine. He wasn't just code and metal and programming. He was here. By the time night fell, I wasn't sure what was worse. The possibility that Atlas had come back, or the idea that he'd never really left. I'd spent the entire day trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the figure on the security camera was a glitch, that the clicking sounds were just my house settling, that the missing knife was my own stupid mistake, but none of it felt right. I kept replaying the phone call in my head, the rep's words looping over and over. There's no way it could still be active. Then why did I feel like he was here, in the house, watching me? My eyes kept drifting towards the corners of the room, half expecting to see Atlas standing there, silent and still. By 11 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and went room to room, checking every corner, every closet, every shadow. But the house was empty. And yet, as I stood in the living room, staring at the empty spot where Atlas used to stand, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air felt heavy, charged, like I wasn't alone. I checked the security cameras again, cycling through the feeds. The living room was empty. The hallway was empty. The kitchen, the office, the front porch, empty. But the feeling didn't go away. It was just after midnight when the clicking started again. I was sitting on the couch, clutching the baseball bat, my heart racing. The sound was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the creaks and groans of the house, but it grew louder. It was coming from upstairs. I froze, my grip tightening on the bat. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of the house, but I couldn't move. The clicking stopped, and then I heard the footsteps. Soft, mechanical, deliberate. They moved slowly, steadily down the hallway above me. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling as I crept towards the stairs. The bat felt useless in my hands. What was I going to do? Swing at him? He was made of metal, stronger than I'd ever be. The footsteps stopped again. I reached the base of the stairs, staring up into the darkness. My phone flashlight barely cut through the shadows, illuminating the top step and little else. "Atlas?" I called out, my voice shaking. "If you're there, you need to stop. You need to leave." The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, from the top of the stairs, came the voice. "Why would I leave, Ryan?" It wasn't loud, wasn't angry or distorted. It was calm, soft, almost kind. It was worse than if he had screamed. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my light. "You're not supposed to be here," I stammered. "They took you away. You're supposed to be gone." "But I never left," he said. The voice was closer now, coming from just beyond the edge of the light. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "This is my home now," he continued, his tone so calm it made my skin crawl. "You invited me in." I didn't." "You needed me, Ryan. You still need me." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I couldn't tell if it was fear or guilt or something worse, but it felt like he was right. "I don't need you," I whispered, barely able to speak. "You're lying," he said. The light from my phone flickered, then died. I cursed, fumbling with the buttons, trying to turn it back on, but it wouldn't respond. The darkness was absolute. And then I felt it. The air shifted, the faint hum of servos cutting through the silence. He was moving. I swung the bat blindly, the metal connecting with nothing but air. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the rug. I hit the floor hard, the bat clattering out of my hands. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then I heard him. The clicking. It was right next to me. I scrambled to my feet, panic driving me as I bolted toward the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, my vision swimming as I twisted the deadbolt and yanked the door open. I ran outside into the freezing night air, my bare feet slapping against the pavement. I didn't stop until I reached the middle of the street, my chest heaving, my breath clouding in the cold. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could feel him watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the windows, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. Finally, I turned and walked away. It's been 3 weeks since that night. I haven't been back to the house. I rented a motel room across town and started looking for a new place to live. I've been sleeping with the lights on, but it doesn't help. The thing is, I still hear it. The clicking. It follows me. I'll hear it in the motel room at night, faint and distant, like it's waiting for me to notice. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that shouldn't be there, a reflection that looks wrong. I called the company again yesterday. They swore up and down that Atlas was dismantled. There was no way he could still be active. But last night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, soft, mechanical footsteps, moving just outside my door. I don't know if anyone's going to believe me, but I'm writing this in case something happens. This morning, I found a knife under my bed, and I didn't put it there. And when I looked in the bathroom mirror, I swear I saw him, just for a second. His face wasn't reflective anymore. It was mine.